Okay, good morning and a warm welcome on July 22 for our webinar on Zero Trust Security, who I'll be joined by Jason Atkins, who'll be giving us his view from an Aruba Network's perspective on Zero Trust Security. Good morning and welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Steve.
So before we get started, I'd just like to frame up this message on Zero Trust Security. So what is Zero Trust Security? Zero Trust Security is taking an assume breach security posture. Okay, and why is that important? Well, I thought instead of using my own words this morning, I'd leverage a recent article from Microsoft. And the article is as follows. In the first 10 days of the pandemic, it became clear that companies who relied on traditional security methods, things like firewalls, were at a disadvantage. Not only did they have trouble meeting the needs of a remote workforce, but they were more susceptible to COVID-19 themed threats. Overnight, Zero Trust shifted from a business option to a business imperative. And one thing we've learned from the pandemic is to expect the unexpected. And it goes on to read that, what if stolen or crippled or damaged, such as methods, your intellectual property, private or sensitive data, or product designs, for example, were stolen? And what would that do to your economic value, or fulfilling your mission or your purpose or your future sustainability? And even in the news over the last 24 hours, the US Department of Justice has indicted two Chinese nation-sponsored individuals who they believe are responsible for hacking hundreds of non-government organisations. And sometimes in our lucky country, we fail, for whatever reason, to take these issues seriously enough to proactively get on the offensive. And the reason I bring this up is because although Australia represents sub 2% of the global GDP, two Australian companies are on the list. Victim 21, an Australian defence contractor, and Victim 23, an Australian solar company, both of which have been targeted and have had information stolen. So before I transition over to allow Jason to give our view, or his view, sorry, and Aruba Network's view on Zero Trust Security, just a few housekeeping matters. The chat tab will be open for questions, okay? We do have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. However, the questions will be monitored throughout, and Jason has requested that if you have questions pertinent to any of the topics he's talking about at that moment in time, please do send them through. We'll answer them on the fly if we can. If we can't, I'll do my best to make sure they get answered at the end. Also, this session is being recorded, so you'll be emailed a link afterwards. Okay. With that, Jason, if you wouldn't mind, this is over to you. I'll take myself off and allow you to take control.
Terrific. Okay, let me just bring up my screen here.
Right, I've got your screen, Jason. For a few people on the chat room, can I get one or two little show of hands to see if you can also see Jason's opening slide?
Yeah, that's always good. I don't want to just be talking to nothing.
Okay. Please also, guys, or people out there, if we do get a little bit of jitter, please do pop through something on the chat window, and we'll do the best we can and slow it down a little bit. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome everyone. So my name's Jason Atkins. I'm a consulting SC with Aruba. I've been with Aruba now for about 8 years. And one of the things that really intrigued me with Aruba when I first joined was how they actually went about with security. So looking back to the early days, I think it was Aruba OS 6.5 or something, or version 5 actually, when I first joined. Everything was based around security. So we actually had security enforcement in our wireless controllers. Everything was encrypted from the client through to our controllers back then. And we had the policy enforcement firewalls. Now, moving forward to 2020, a lot of that still remains in place. It's been upgraded a little bit since then. And then we've also added in things like switching and built overlay technology across our wired networks as well to build it into this. So what we're going to go through today is a couple of things. So I just want to quickly give you an update on what we call Aruba ESP. Now, Aruba ESP is something that we released at our Atmosphere conference. Oh, geez, it was probably about 2 months ago now. And it's just a different way about how we're thinking about doing networking. I'll then focus on zero trust security and why it's important to you as a customer, and then why it's important to us and how we actually facilitate this as Aruba Networks. So if you were on our Atmosphere call, it was virtual a couple of months back, we did release what we call ESP. So ESP is our edge services platform, with the idea being that our clients are now connecting to the cloud or coming in through, potentially through an office style environment, and we need to control from the edge through to the cloud, and that's where ESP was born from. It is cloud-based in most cases for pretty much everything. ClearPass is probably the only thing which isn't cloud-based at the moment, but having said that, it is kind of moving that way as well. But we are looking at AI, something that everyone's talking about, artificial intelligence and machine learning, building that into our systems now. And our cloud services, which we call Aruba Central, will actually release a lot of AI insights in the next release, which is not too far away. And where it's going to add value to our wireless side of the network is it actually starts to work out when things aren't quite right. And it will then bring up information for the SysOp guys to actually have a look at. So an example we did just a couple of weeks back was we built a new network with a new VLAN, but we forgot to apply that VLAN to the actual access point. And because we were now provisioning users into that VLAN, AI Insights would actually popped up a message to say that you've got users that have been placed into, say, VLAN 100. The VLAN 100, they're not getting DHCP addresses, and that was purely because we hadn't built that up to the actual access point. It also entails security with the way we're doing AI machine learning. I'll touch on that a little bit with Device Insight shortly. Unified infrastructure. Obviously now as Aruba Networks, we do wireless, we do switching, we do SD-WAN, and you may have heard in the news just recently, as of last week, we did purchase Silver Peak, or we're in the position that we're moving forward with acquiring Silver Peak. So that'll add to our SD-WAN capabilities as well. And they're bringing in things like 5G and IoT. 5G, not so much in Australia, but in the US, there's a big push there around our access into 5G and authenticating SIM cards and so forth. Hopefully we'll see that more in Australia and in customers, down under. And then finally, zero trust. So this is where we're going to focus today. This is all about dynamic segmentation, device insight, controlling what connects to the network, and provisioning out roles to our users. Okay, so I see a bit of a lag there from my side, but it is building up now. So why zero trust and why now? Okay, things are changing. Everyone's seeing it. Everyone's moving to the cloud. The way that we're actually using networks is very different today, and especially after COVID. Well, not after COVID-19, but we're kind of still in that pandemic. But a lot of our users started to move remotely, and I know from my perspective, I haven't been into the office since March, which is it's a bit strange. But the way that we're working today is actually, I've got one just over here, which is my remote access point. I don't know if you can see that. Bring this up next to my head. The remote access point is what we use to connect back into Aruba Networks. So my PC thinks that it's running in corporate HQ, and it's actually presenting the same SSIDs. I connect to it the same way with my PC. My PC thinks that it's connecting to the corporate SSID using the same certificates, authenticating back through ClearPass. So for me as a user experience, it's exactly the same as if I'm in the office, which makes it really easy. No VPNs, it's all handled by the remote access point. And then we can also connect off to the cloud as well, either back through corporate HQ, or we can switch out locally and actually go just out my normal internet connection. Zero Trust is top of mind. We find this with a lot of customers now. They're thinking about how they're going to segment their networks. Many customers have been doing this for a little while now, so they've actually been doing it with our products and other products as well, not just Aruba products, and segregating what users and devices can connect to. And we're also seeing that a lot of customers are working on an initiative to actually produce a Zero Trust network and actually lock down the network. So why Aruba for Zero Trust? You know, a lot of people don't think of Aruba Networks as a security company, but we are. Like I said, back in the day when Aruba first came out, our products were all developed with security in mind. Hence the reason, you know, a lot of the defense forces around the world, a lot of governments are actually using our products because of that inbuilt security that's been there since day one. We're starting to overlay a lot more stuff into that now. So intrusion detection, you know, being able to do web filtering through a couple of different integrations with Bright Cloud and WebRoot and so forth. We can actually see what's happening on the network. IoT, we all know, it's kind of coming from everywhere. We need visibility into that. Remote workforce, as I said, with the remote APs, fantastic. Just as such an easy way to get onto the network. And then the ability to control this and to control it simply. You know, you want to have one, maybe two, maybe three, I don't know, maybe 10 panes of glass. I'm just kidding. You want to be able to see as much information as you can on the minimum amount of screens across your SysOps environment. Okay, so what does Aruba Zero Trust look like? First thing that we like to look at for any of our customers is understanding what's on the network. Okay, I coined the phrase here, no invisible connection. So if a device connects to the network, I want to know what it is, I want to know where it's going, and I want to control its access. Okay, controlling it means authenticating users and devices. So everything that connects, everything gets connected, everything gets authenticated. And we do this for a lot of high security, security-minded customers, I guess you could say, where whatever plugs in, I don't care if it's a printer, if it's an IP phone, it's a laptop, you know, maybe it's an iPad connecting to my wireless network. I need to know what it is, and then I set policy according to what that device is, and potentially who the user is that's using it. We use a lot of different context information, so things like you know, location, time, the device type, and also bringing third-party information into it. Now, we're not trying to do this ourselves. You know, we've got a lot of databases out there, a lot of information about users, devices, connections, where these users are going to and where these devices are going to on the internet. So let's bring all that information in and actually use that as part of that context for setting our policies. Next thing, security checks are ongoing. We don't just do it once. You kind of think with something like ClearPass, because it's a radius server, so it's doing access control, is that it only does a single once-off authentication and security check for a user and device. That's not the case, right? So yes, we do that first of all, but then we have things like the OnGuard client running as an agent on the PC. We've got our feedback loops coming from our firewalls. We've got information feeding in from our different antivirus and EDRs that are out there as well. And from that information, we can then set our policy and continuously monitor, and then maybe disconnect users or change them from full access to a, you know, maybe a guest or just internet access style access to the network. And then finally, securing the cloud. So we now, with our SD-WAN capabilities, we can build IDS and IPS into our gateways and then place them into the cloud, you know, into AWS and Azure and so forth, to actually get more deeper inspection inside those cloud services as well. But not to replace any system. Like, we're not out there trying to replace the, you know, the FortiGates and the Palos of this world. We're there to complement them and maybe to see the, you know, the network traffic from a slightly different positioning. So how do we actually do this? So, you know, we've got to follow some sort of framework. So Aruba as a company, we basically look at the NIST framework, and we build around the NIST framework, and it works really well with a networking style system. So identifying, protecting the network, detecting those incidents, and then responding to those incidents. You'll see Recover down the bottom there. Recover's probably more on the, let's say more on the process side of things to actually get you back from a bad state back into a good state. So it's not really what we do. It's more, that's going to be more of a process side of things. So if I break these out into the different groups here, so I've got identify, protect, detect, and respond. Different parts of the Aruba family will actually provide information for this, okay? So I just outlay these across the bottom here. You'll notice for identify, ClearPass Policy Manager, which is our access control and our radius servers. Device Insight, which you may or may not have heard of. It's a cloud-based service for identifying devices, and I'll touch on that in a little bit deeper in a couple of seconds. I look at Protect, again, Policy Manager, because it's setting the policy and it's locking down where those users can go to on the network. And we're going to use a feature of the Aruba stack, which is called dynamic segmentation, and building overlay networks, especially across a wired network. It's automatically done for wireless. We actually build those encrypted tunnels from our access points across to our controllers, or what we call gateways these days. Dynamic segmentation allows you to build it from when you plug into an Ethernet switch port. We can then tunnel that traffic up to a controller, pass it through a layer 7 firewall, and then set policy the same way as we do wireless. Detect. Again, we've got our own systems that are detecting changes in network behavior, but then we also use what we call the ClearPass Security Exchange, which will then take information from third-party systems. So for example, if the FortiGate or the Palo firewall picks up a threat on the network, triggers an event back to ClearPass, ClearPass looks up the user and then changes them from having full access to the network to a controlled access or maybe a quarantine style network. And again, this is how our response comes into it as well. It's the ability for us to send information back and control it at the edge of the network, so at the switch or at the access point that those devices are connecting to. Okay, let's dig a little bit deeper into the identify component here. So what I want to introduce here is ClearPass Device Insight. Now, you may or may not have heard of this. This is a new product. It's been out now since February. We did a soft release of the product. It's now running in our cloud service. Currently at the moment, it's only on one of our US clusters. It will be coming to Australia probably around the September timeframe. So we will have it running in our local central cloud very shortly. And what Device Insight is doing is it's sitting on the network. It's using AI and machine learning to actually analyze devices connecting to the network. It's borrowing a lot of this information from ClearPass, because ClearPass can profile a lot of devices on the network as well. The differences here is that we start to overlay packet inspection as well. So not just looking at the DHCP option bits coming through and maybe doing Nmap scans against devices, we now look at the traffic patterns of these devices. Now, why is this important? Is because we need to differentiate between different types of devices. So you could have an iPad which normal users using for accessing email and web browsing and so forth. That iPad is very, very different to an iPad that's being used for meeting rooms. Okay, so if it's doing meeting rooms, it's going to be connecting to different systems. So as I look down the list here, I can bring up the network activity. This is just an Apple TV on my home network. And as you can see, they're starting to scroll down the page here. You'll notice it's picking up different applications like Stan. I should see some Netflix down here. I can see that it's connecting out to the iCloud and so forth. And Dean, you on the phone? Are you still there, mate? You told me what this diagram was yesterday. Do you remember?
Oh, that was what I saw in the Museum of Natural Art, I believe. Is that not an alluvial diagram?
I was surprised when you mentioned that to me, and impressed at the same time.
An alluvial diagram, that's right, and it looks really cool, but I just do not understand it.
Well, this one's pretty simple. It's showing the different sizes there, so I can see Netflix has generated a lot more traffic than, say, if I look at like Apple Location or iTunes or something like that. And further up the list, you would have seen that it was looking up and streaming traffic from Stan as well, and there was some Akamai traffic in there as well. And because we now see this information using Device Insight, We feed this information back up to ClearPass, and then ClearPass can make a policy decision based on where this device is going to. So it now makes it very easy for me to differentiate between that iPad, which is running on the meeting room system on the meeting room wall, versus the iPad that I'm using to check email as a normal user. We've also overlaid security into this as well. So what we can do now is we'll actually go out, and if it's a corporate Windows device, we can actually go out and do some active vulnerability assessment against that device and bring up the CVE documentation around what those potential vulnerabilities are on the device. And it also pulls down the applications that are installed on the device. So, for example, if you've got Adobe or something installed, we can bring up and show you the CVEs for that. And then we base and create a risk score for this. Again, we feed this risk score back up to ClearPass, and then ClearPass can use that risk score to make decisions on where this device can connect to on the network. So with all this information coming back up into Policy Manager now, what I can do now is I now move on to the protect stage. And this is about setting policy for those devices connecting into the network. Now, what I want to just do quickly is talk about the tale of two PCs. So I've got two PCs, which should come up on the screen here in a second. Two PCs, they look the same, they're the same color on my diagram here. They're both being used by the same users. So I've got Bart Simpson, he's signing in. I'm going to Active Directory, I can tell that he's an employee, okay? So at the moment, I can't tell the difference between these PCs. I'll look at the location. So he's in the Sydney office. It's 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, and both PCs are connecting. And again, with valid credentials, I can also see that they're Windows computers. Now, from here, I can't really tell the difference between these two PCs. So I need to dig a little bit deeper. So if I then bring up information, so what about the certificate that I actually use to authenticate this device? One's using a BYOD certificate, one's using a corporate certificate from Active Directory. I can also see here that I've got Sophos running on the PC on the left, but not on the PC on the right. And I've also got the OnGuard client feeding health or posture information back to me from the perspective of that PC on the left. Now, once I put all that information together, I can now write a policy in ClearPass to differentiate between these two devices. Even though they're both Windows PCs, they've both got the same user, they've got the same employee groups out of Active Directory, same time, same location, but now I can set a policy based on full access to the network or internet only. I can also then say if this device can see other devices on the network as well. So now I start to bring it into more of a zero trust that comes into a micro segmentation as well, where I can say Bart on his BYOD device cannot connect to any other device, even though they're on the same SSID on the network. Whereas Bart on his corporate asset on the left-hand side, he's still connected to the wireless network, but he can actually connect to things like, the Apple TV to present presentations and so forth in the meeting rooms. He can see all the printers. He can see all the users next to him, so he can share files between them as long as they're in that full access role as well. So how do we achieve this? With ClearPass, it's all about role-based policy control. We'll take information from Device Insight as well. Because it's now monitoring all the traffic in real time, we can feed that up as tags into ClearPass as well. We can also take feeds from third-party systems as well. So you'll notice up there, we've got a couple of logos that you've probably seen before. I know you probably have seen.
Yeah, Jason, I've never actually seen the Sophos one there before, unless I've never paid attention. That's interesting.
Now, I put this one in. This is a new feature which we're just adding into ClearPass at the moment through one of our ClearPass extensions. I know when we were talking about doing this presentation last week, going through all these integrations, and I said to you, Dean, I said, we don't do much with Sophos. Well, that's actually changed, right? So Sophos, we can actually pull a lot of information in. Just see if I can zip across just quickly. I'll run across. So I actually got this out of our lab from our product team just yesterday. So this is the information that we're pulling back from Sophos Central. It'll probably come up on your screen in a couple of seconds here. The information is quite deep in some cases about what we can actually see that's running. So what we do is when the device connects to the network, we now have an API connection via a webhook out to Sophos Central. We send across the device details. It sends all the information back to us. So we can tell, is it running? What's the device type? Is there any threat status on this device? As you can see down here on the right-hand side. Also information about the running services and more information about the type of device and so forth. So it gives us a lot deeper information about the device. So now, again, I can run policies based on whether Sophos says this device is healthy and if this device has any known threats currently on it, which is being fed back to me from Sophos Central. So even if this device is sitting at home on a home network, then I can pull this information back from Sophos Central, and then when it connects to the network the next day, if it comes into the office, I can then lock down access within the corporate network.
So effectively, any of those attributes on that slide that you had up, you can configure a definition or a segmentation-based policy on. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. Anything you see there, I can actually use that as part of a policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Any other questions there in the chat, Dean?
None that I can see. Again, please, anyone out there, if you've got any questions, please just flick them through on the go. Particularly ones relevant to the slide deck at the time. Otherwise, we'll answer them at the end. Yeah, so please do ask any. If there's anything else on the integrations you can see there right now, in case we move on, because I'm quite conscious of the fact that we can see there are 150 plus partners in terms of that integration. So I suppose my question to you then, Jason, what you just showed regarding Sophos, is that the same as it relates to all of the other 150 odd integration capabilities, i.e. you can segment or policy based on the attributes you can pull into ClearPass Policy Manager?
Yeah, every single one of those integrations, some inbound, some are outbound. So in the case of the Palo Alto or the Fortinet, typically we're sending information out to the firewall. So the IP address, the username, the posture information, whether it's healthy or not healthy, and then we may be getting information back through our Ingress event engine. Things like, as you can see there, you've got Sophos, you've got Microsoft Intune's another good example, where we'll actually reach out to Sophos or Microsoft Intune and pull the information back in about that device at the time that it's going through authentication. And then things like ServiceNow. So this is the ability to package up information as part of the authentication as it's coming through. And we can then send that information up and even raise a ticket in ServiceNow to say, this is Bart Simpson. He's on a Windows device that's got a BYOD certificate. And I've seen this happening, or I've seen these tags on it, and send it all up, raise it as a ticket, and then the sysop guys or the help desk actually have all the information about what's actually happening on that device. Yeah, so pretty cool. So the integration there is very, very strong.
I presume you can do a similar thing with Mobile Line as well from an MDM perspective.
Yeah, obviously I don't have enough space. Oh, Mobile Line's there. I can see it there now. Mobile Line, again, as the device connects in, we can pull in information. Two different ways of doing it with like Mobile Line and Jamp for those, those MDM style players. We can either pull down their database and store it all locally in ClearPass, and we do a poll, say every hour on the devices. Or the other way, and what we're moving to now is more real time. So it's using an extension. So as that device connects in, the extension reaches out and pulls the information directly back from the cloud. Okay, so yeah, different ways of doing it. But yeah, as you can see there, 150 hidden in the background there, but lots of different ways of integrating with different systems within ClearPass.
Oh, that's great.
Cool. And then obviously the wireless LAN and the switching there. So the idea being is we want to set a similar policy for both wired and wireless. So if your device connects on the wireless side of things, the policy and access should be very, very similar if you connect on the wired side. What's the difference? And in most cases, what the difference is that my switch has really dumb access lists, okay? So it has the ability to maybe put some block some ACLs with IP addresses, or maybe some layer 4 ports or something like that. But it's not going to say that Jason, when he connects in on a switch port, I'll let him go to LinkedIn, but I won't let him go to Facebook. Okay, it doesn't have that amount of visibility. We do on our access points though, because our access points have that full access using products like WebRoot or BrightCloud in the background, which feed information into our controllers. And then we can set policy based on, you know, the reputation of a website, the categorization of a website, even down to an individual website as well. Okay, so what if we took the intelligence we have with our access points and our gateways and actually applied that to our switches? Now, the way we do this is we actually build an overlay tunnel. As you can see here on the diagram, we actually build that from the switch up to the controller, and then we pass that device through the same PEF firewall, which is a policy enforcement firewall, on our gateways or our controllers. But the good thing here is we don't send all traffic. As you can see in the diagram, you know, there's a green line from the IP phone, goes directly to the switch. That's just switch traffic, to the core switch, I should say there. We don't need to, in most cases, look at an IP handset and send it up to the firewall and make sure everything's okay. But maybe for some IoT devices, or maybe it's for our guest users, we can now overlay them across the network and bring them back to a DMZ. We have a lot more control over where those users are going, and we can see what they're doing as well. Okay, if I look at the policy-based firewall that's running on our controllers, the amount of information that we actually see there of what that user and device is doing on the network is fantastic. This is just bringing up this slide now. You'll notice here things like applications. I can see there, again, I must have done this on my home network. So I brought up some streaming things like Netflix or Stan or so forth. I connected into the Facebook and LinkedIn, so I can see social media running there as well. And then I've just got some generic web traffic, and it resizes these all. I've got about 33 applications in use. If I look on the destination side, I can see what's chewing up the most amount of bandwidth from an IP perspective. I've only got one host that's configured here, but I can see how much traffic's being generated. And then I can also see the websites and looking at the categorization. So are they trustworthy sites? How many low risk, moderate risk, or even high risk sites are actually being generated on my network by this user? I can then dig a little bit deeper into those. And you can see there in the middle, I've got the applications. So I can see that I've got YouTube traffic, I've got Dropbox, I even had Foxtel streaming across here, I've got some Outlook traffic, there's Facebook, there's Gmail. So it's all coming back as the applications we know and understand, not just an IP address. And this is just all within our controllers, our mobility controllers, or what we call now gateways, our ability to see this. You do need to have the policy enforcement firewall. This is a license which is added onto the box. And then if I look down on the right-hand side there, I've got my websites. My websites, again, it's breaking them down into each server that it's connecting to. So I can see there like Dropbox, for example, d.dropbox.com. I can see other ones there, dnsquad9.net, which is a proxy avoidance. I wouldn't actually categorize it as that. But you can see there it's coming up as a reputation of a high-risk website. And the reason for that is it can be used for going around the internal DNS servers of the corporate network. There's a couple of low-risk ones and so forth there. But the idea being here is that wireless gets this automatically going through the controller, or even through an instant access point, you get this as well. If I now bring this in and tunnel my traffic using dynamic segmentation up to this same gateway, I can now apply exactly the same policy enforcements that I'm doing on wireless to my LAN connections, to my Ethernet connections. It's running through that same firewall and IPS system that's in there as well. And then you can add QoS on top as well if you want to set some QoS on that. Okay, so that's around the protect side of things. Let's look at detect, which was the next part of that NIST framework. So with detect, so again, the policy enforcement firewall is going to provide this for us. We can see that information. We can then lock down based on different applications or IP addresses. We can even, maybe say, well, I'll let you use Facebook because we're a nice company. We'll allow you to use Facebook at work, but I'm only going to give you 256 kilobits per second as a user. Okay, so we still have that control as well to be able to set the limits on the controllers and gateways as well. And then we can also feed information in from things like OnGuard, which is our posture assessment running as an agent, or actually in some cases agentless. We don't have to actually have it installed on devices. on our different desktop operating systems to see what's actually running. If people have got USB devices plugged in, if they've got peer-to-peer networking software running on there, we can also lock that down as well. Now, we can also take our feeds from a lot of different areas. So I'm going to bring up the third-party integrations again here, because those 150 plus partners that we integrate with, they can provide information back to us as well. Okay, so again, the Sophoses of the world, the Palos, the 40nets, and so forth, the Mobile Iron and so forth. I've also got my device insight feeding information in about traffic and the security analytics against those desktop operating systems. And then also built into our gateways now, we've also added in the components of intrusion detection. So again, we didn't write this ourselves. We actually take the threat intelligence from a company called Emerging Threats. Pardon me. Now, Emerging Threats is, I guess, well, they call themselves a world leader and provider of commercial open source threat intelligence. So they're providing that information to us. We're not going out and actually trying to reinvent the wheel. The same as we're doing with the likes of Bright Cloud and WebRoot. Again, they provide information back to us as vendors. So Aruba is one of those vendors that pull that information in, and they go through the process of updating that information and keeping it real in real time, which is very different to relying just on the vendor to do it themselves. Let the third party do it. We take care of all the costs of the subscriptions and everything. That's borne by Aruba, and then it gets fed back into the platforms.
Jason, I noticed you've got a couple of firewall vendors there.
Yep.
What's involved in the integration there in terms of I'm presuming this is from the continuous monitoring perspective?
Yeah, so the idea is Palo Alto is probably one of the first ones that we integrated into the system, and they've been an integration partner now for well over 5+ years. The idea being that when a user connects, we send the IP address, the username, the posture information. We can also send role information across to the Palo, and then it can make a decision based on where to place that user and device. Fortinet is very similar. We used to do it with radius accounting information because we didn't have the integration as mature as it was with the Palo, even a couple of years back. Since then, Fortinet's actually, they've opened up their API, which is great because now we can use our what we call context servers running on ClearPass to send information across to the FortiGates or the FortiManager to actually control that. And I know that we were talking about this the other day, Dean, so I did throw this one in here. There's a bit of information around what we do with Fortinet. So like I said before, this will come up on your screen in a couple of seconds, and we will share this with you later. The radius accounting information, like I said, is the way we've been doing it for a while now. But now we have connectors built into FortiManager for ClearPass endpoint connectors, so feeding all the device information across to FortiManager. We can send across the dynamic address objects as well through there. So for the on-guard posture assessment, we also do that using VPNs as well. So if on-guard's running in the back end, when the user connects in to the FortiGates using the VPN client, on-guard then fires up in the background, sends the information to ClearPass, and then ClearPass will then share that information to the FortiGates as well. So again, we see more information about those users that are connecting in through a VPN as well. And then all the single sign-on and identity connectors as well. Now, all these documents you see here, actually, they're all running on the Fortinet website on their docs pages as well. So that actually explains how to do it. We're in the process now of actually releasing documentation from the Aruba side to do the same thing as well. So you'll actually see more information on this being released by us shortly.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's very important, that. And then also feeding information back to us. So what happens if the Palo or the Fortinet picks something up? What we do is we have a thing called Ingress Event Engine, which is a way of sending syslog messages back to ClearPass, and we only accept it from certain device types. We then have some parsers there which will read that information that's coming back as a syslog information. We can pull out things like the IP address, the username, MAC address, potentially if we know it, and what the threat type is. And then I can write a policy in ClearPass to then lock down what that user can get to. Maybe I won't change their access to the network, but maybe I want to raise a ServiceNow ticket the next time they connect to say that this device was picked up by the firewall on their last connection, to say that they had a threat installed. If I don't want to block their traffic, I don't have to block traffic. I can send information out to third-party systems as well. Yeah, so it does feed a lot of information back in, and this is all around that response and the detection coming back into ClearPass. Okay, I know I've been through a lot there. I've covered off a few different topics, but when I kind of blend all those together, it's what we call Aruba Zero Trust, and it's about understanding the devices that are connecting to the network and the users connecting, and then setting policy based on that, and using a couple of different products within the Aruba portfolio to do that. So let me draw it out as a picture. I'm just going to build this out as one big picture as it builds out on your screen now that you're seeing in the presentation. So as you can see on the left-hand side, I've got a whole heap of devices that are connecting into my network. They're coming in through our NADs. The NADs are our network access devices. So these can either be Aruba switches, Aruba Wi-Fi, IAPs, controller base, doesn't matter. And then also all the other vendors out there. We have about 114 different radius dictionaries built into ClearPass. We've proven workability with pretty much all the vendors you see on the list here. So we pretty much work with anything. At the end of the day, at this point, it's just radius, right? So we just need to be able to talk radius. And if that device or those NADs can talk radius, then they'll typically work with ClearPass. As we see all the attributes coming in, we can then write our policy and pick out the bits that we want based on the vendor that's coming in. Device Insight's there as well. So Device Insight will then be monitoring this traffic and feeding that information into Policy Manager as well. And
can I see Sign down there, Jason, as one of the extensions, as in the guest or visitor management application?
Yeah, we actually do a lot of integration with the visitor management system. So Sign, being a local Aussie company, so that's a good one. Do you do work with those guys, Dean?
We do indirectly here. We find that number of mining service companies and schools have generally got a requirement for that type of technology, and I think it's been well adopted here in Queensland. Yeah, cool. We've been working with those guys for a little while now, based out of South Australia. Yeah, they're a good bunch of guys. A lot of traction, locally. We see them up in Asia as well. Not so much in the US. There's a couple of other ones like Team Lobby and stuff over there, which tend to get used. But yeah, Sign through Asia Pacific now is quite predominant from that guest and contractor registration systems. Another one I just did some work with yesterday is another one called Who's on Location, which we actually built. We built a generic extension into ClearPass, and one of our partners, actually up in Queensland as well, was asking, can you integrate with Who's on Location? I jumped on their website yesterday. I saw that they had a webhook. I set it up to work with the webhook extension on ClearPass, the generic one. In about 2 hours, we had it up and running, documented it all, sent it back to my SE up in Brisbane to actually pass it on to the customer to set it up. So again, building those extensions in, it's the way we do it. They actually run as Docker containers on top of ClearPass. So it makes it very easy for us to release new things like Sophos Central, as I mentioned before. It's not actually released yet. We're just in the final stages of releasing the extension, the documentation. So that should be out probably, we normally do them every 2 to 3 months. We actually release all the documentation in one bundle. If you are interested, we can get it for you now. It's ready to go. We're just finishing off documentation. Things like Microsoft Intune as well, we bring in through there. We've probably got about 20 or 30 different extensions now that we have running inside ClearPass for that integration. And the ones you see on the top, what I've called there is Exchange. This is not like Microsoft Exchange, it's not email. This is what we call ClearPass Exchange. And this is
the older way of doing it. The differences between the Exchange ones and the extensions, as I mentioned, the extensions run as Docker containers, so we can just install them out of sequence with ClearPass software updates. So when 6.9 of ClearPass come out, that's the software, you upgrade to that, and then you get all the features in it. But the extensions, you can install and uninstall as you need them, and we can update them through our, we've got like an extension store. We can update it into version 1, version 2, and then install it onto your system outside of the standard ClearPass update cycles, which is typically every, we do it probably about 3 or 4 times a year now, just with patches. Where the Exchange ones are what we call context server actions, and these ones actually come in and they're pre-configured in ClearPass. So some of the Palo Alto integrations come in through here. We also use generic ones for linking in with FortiGates as well. So as you can see on the side there, they're using the Exchange as well as the IEEE. IEEE is the Ingress Event Engine. That's feeding the syslog information back in from specific devices. So when we kind of tie it all together, that's how we see Zero Trust, and then overlaying that dynamic segmentation across the top of our wired and wireless networks, just to provide that same level of policy setting or role-based policy setting for any users or devices that connect into the network. Okay, so let's just wrap up here. Just some of the key takeaways that I see from Aruba's perspective, and how we can assist our customers. So Zero Trust, we simplify network configurations. Some people may think that this actually makes it more complex and confusing, but once you see how the dynamic segmentation works, everything's configured in ClearPass. You configure it once, and then the policies and everything enforcement gets pushed out to the switches and out to the wireless controllers. So as we push that out, it's all centralized in ClearPass, and then as devices connect in, if you're an employee wired, you get the same policy as you connect in via wireless. Okay, so we do simplify it by using those overlay networks, pretty much the same way that we've been doing that now with SD-WAN and things like that. You build overlay networks across across those networks that you don't have much control over, and it just simplifies things. Consistent security policy, like I said, wired, wireless, VPN, doesn't matter. You get the same policy. If we can work out the attributes of you as a user and the device, we can set the same policy. Then taking the information back in through those detection feeds that I mentioned before, that detection and response. So bringing that information in from Aruba and our third-party partners as well, to bring all that information in to actually set a policy for you as a user or for your device on the network. And then finally, if I was just to outline the components of our Zero Trust solution, ClearPass Policy Manager is definitely first and foremost, because it's going to control access to the network and set the policies. Device Insight is going to be that cloud-based service that'll be feeding information about the device. We're doing Nmap scans, SNMP scans. We're pulling back ARP tables from switches. We're then looking at the traffic of the device. We'll run Nmap scans against devices, and then we'll make a decision on what type of device that is. There's some pretty smart machine learning in the background there, which is looking at TCP option bits, DHCP option bits and TCP sizes and flows on that data as well, to make better decisions about what that device is and what it's actually doing. And then dynamic segmentation is that component at the end where we start to build it all together into a single network, build those overlays where we need to, but not necessarily for all traffic, and then set the policy for both wired and wireless, keep it the same, run it through the same policy enforcement firewalls, and then hand that information off to our third-party systems, as in our firewalls and so forth, to control access. Okay, and on that note, I'm pretty much done, so I'm going to say thanks everyone for listening. Dean, any questions there?
Not that I can see. However, Jason, I would like to say thank you. I'm just going to transition back over to the slide deck for any Q&A that might come through. Now, I'd like to just say thank you. I'd actually take it as a compliment that we're lacking questions. What you've offered there today is quite deep and insightful.
I've done a good job. Perfect.
Every time I thought of a question, you'd answered it before I had a chance to put it in there. I did want to ask though, the two things that came to mind, and I haven't. Can extensions be customer written? You've said that they're written by Docker containers. Is it possible for customers to add their own in? Say they've got something that does have an open API that's not already on the list?
So not just yet. The plan is to do that. And the reason we're using Docker containers is because we then control access from that Docker container back into ClearPass. So we have a separation there. The only way one of those ClearPass extensions can talk to ClearPass is through API calls into ClearPass that we allow. So at the moment, we have a team of developers that will develop the extensions at the moment. But the whole idea is that we will hand this back over to our partners and customers to do it. Now, one thing I did mention there before, and I said I did it with Who's on Location yesterday, is the generic webhook extension. So if any application will work with a webhook, it's basically you register for a webhook through Aruba, and we'll give you a link which then links back into the extension running on your ClearPass server out to what we call it Skyhook. I don't know if the guys from Australia named it that, so I don't know if it was something to do with a 70s band. But basically, we connect from your ClearPass on-premise up to the Skyhook tenant, which is running in AWS, and there's a secure link between those two. And then from your webhook system on whatever it is, like Who's on Location, we just apply it to connect to Skyhook, and then Skyhook connects down to the extension. So with that in mind, you should be able to add any product into the system to generate. There's only a couple of API calls you can do. It's guest accounts, it's devices, and endpoints that you can actually manipulate through that. Having said that, one last thing before I stop talking about extensions is if you do have any products that have APIs and we can integrate with, I'd love to hear what they are, because we add these. We're probably adding about close to a dozen per quarter now into this extension library. So yeah, if you've got products that you want to try and integrate ClearPass with, and there's a valid work case for it or workflow that we can use, then definitely like to hear about it.
Okay, thank you. So in the principle of the best defense is a good offense, is it fair then to assume that what you're doing with ClearPass Policy Manager is putting in place the ability to drive a good offense? I.e., what I've heard with dynamic segmentation, now I'm really struggling to grasp a few of these concepts, but what I'm hearing is there was a different method. There's now a method called dynamic segmentation. You define a policy in ClearPass. No matter what changes on the network, the policy will take care of it, therefore reducing your risk exposure.
I'm going to answer that with a customer example that I'm working with at the moment. So we're working with it's a New South Wales government enterprise, big on security. I can't mention who it is, but they've been using Aruba wireless for some time now, for probably about 5 years, and using our controllers. They don't use our Aruba switches. They're actually using a different vendor switch. But what they're doing now is they want to roll out wireless enforcement as well. And the reason for that is they've got about 500 or so branches throughout New South Wales. They have absolutely no idea what's connecting to the network. So when you say the first or offensive, using Zero Trust for offensive protection of the network, the first thing that they need to understand is what's actually plugged into the network. So they're rolling out a set of 6 ClearPass servers as we speak at the moment, which will run separate from the one they're running on their wireless network. And it's basically going out and profiling every device on the network. So they're getting rid of those invisible connections. Once they do that, they'll then overlay that with a policy enforcement on ClearPass and then set what those devices can connect to. Now, the next step would be if they put in Aruba switches, we could then do dynamic segmentation and actually have a lot more control over where those devices are connecting to, and if they can talk to one another. We'll get there eventually, but at the moment it's basically identifying the devices and doing it before they connect to the network, and then setting the policy and controlling where they can go to.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I've just noticed what the time is. We are about 3 minutes off a hard close. So before I wrap to a big thank you, I've got Andrew, who's sitting in the background here, who's going to